So yesterday, I finally got the platinum trophy in Rise of the Ronin. It only took me 138 hours. To put things into perspective, it took me 48 hours to get the platinum trophy in Marvel Spider-Man 2. And I was really taking my time. So 138 hours tells you everything you need to know when it comes to my experience with the game. I had a great time. I had the best of time. Usually, whenever you acquire every single trophy the game has to offer, it means that there's nothing else to do. You have to move on to something else. Well, that's not my case because now I can focus on doing other things like making guides, like proper guides, when it comes to helping people have an easier time with the game, and when it comes to those mechanics you don't quite understand. So in case you have some suggestions when it comes to what you would like to see, in a guide, in a video, I'm open to ideas. So shoot and we'll see. So when it comes to my experience with Rise of the Ronin, it was a good one. Like I said, I didn't drop it on a single time, and the game kept getting interesting. And that's very good because usually sometimes when you play a game for so long, at some point you just get bored, and maybe you just get bored of doing the same things over and over and over again. But that was never my case, and I don't think it's going to be my case anytime soon, especially if they keep making updates, they keep making quality of life improvements. People have been talking about PvP, and I think this is a better game for PvP than Wolong was. So it wouldn't really make sense for Rise of the Ronin to not have PvP, and maybe that's why they're making some adjustments, some balance patches here and there, because they want to make sure that there are no exploits, nothing you can abuse when we actually allowed to PvP. But if Team Ninja is considering adding new things to the game, well, it's only going to extend the game's longevity, which is what we all want, all us Ronins want. So if you are wondering if you should get the game, I would say get it if you're already familiar with Team Ninja's games. For example, Nioh, the Nioh series 1 and 2, and Wolong. But if you are someone who really loved a game like Ghost of Tsushima, for example, you may dislike, it's not a certainty, you may dislike Rise of the Ronin mostly because it doesn't look as good as Ghost of Tsushima, and that's okay. You have to appreciate games for what they're trying to do instead of trying to compare them. And I really think when it comes to mechanics, they are marginally different. Ghost of Tsushima and Rise of the Ronin are completely different. That's why you should lower your expectations and appreciate Rise of the Ronin for what it's trying to accomplish, as opposed to trying to compare it to what you want it to be. That's why I said that if you're already familiar with Nioh and Wolong, you know exactly what you're getting. You know exactly what kind of gameplay you can expect. With that aside, how was my experience? I said it was good, but it wasn't perfect. And the first thing I want to talk about is the lack of consequences. The way this story is structured, you could remove some core components and nothing will change. For example, I think the whole Blade Twin storyline was either underutilized or completely useless. And I forgot to mention something very important. For the first time in a long time, I was actually invested in a Team Ninja story. I've played Nioh for a long time. I probably get 500 to 600 hours in those games, but I can't tell you what the story is about, except I'm Rita and something something Oni and something something Yoki. I don't know for real what the story is about. But when it comes to Rise of the Ronin, I was actually invested in both parties, the anti-Shogunate party and the pro-Shogunate party. I was really trying to understand where the story will go next, who was going to be the next person I would meet, and go on Google to see what the actual story of that person was. So I never done that in Nioh, like ever before, but this time I was actually trying to see how they will implement those people in the game. Sometimes they did an amazing job, and some other times it was a bit underwhelming. But I think the game story is fine, is good, but a bit too long. Since the story was not the main thing I enjoyed, that was the combat and all those other mechanics. I feel like 30% to 40% reduction when it comes to length would have been the sweet spot for me. And I feel like removing the Blade Twin storyline would actually made it more compelling for me. That's my experience. Maybe your mileage may differ. That's why I'm open to listening to what you think about story. But overall, solid story, but just a bit too long with a bit of unnecessary events happening, especially when it comes to your Blade Twin. And like I said in the beginning, there is a problem with consequences. It almost feels like your actions don't carry any weight. No matter what you do, it does not matter. You can befriend allies or enemies. It doesn't matter. That one person who wanted to kill you an hour ago can be your bestie or even your lover the next hour. I feel like that's a bit strange. I understand that they were trying to they wanted to allow people to have bonds with almost everybody, but I feel like that's usually what New Game Plus is for, to make different choices. And I feel like they try to do something which isn't quite New Game Plus, but also allows you to replay missions. But now you can have relationships with pretty much everybody, regardless of if they were foe or allies. And I feel like it contributed to me not being invested in some characters the way I would have been if my actions actually had consequences. And that's one thing I really love about Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring. Your actions matter, have actual weight. So sometimes that one person you talk to can be the reason why all those events unfold later. And I feel like this is a great way to connect players to characters, because then they are significantly more careful. They really want to know what they need to do in order to not mess up. But whenever you allow people to just do whatever they want without punishing them, you can switch from anti-shogunate to pro-shogunate and nobody cares. You are a traitor walking among them. They know about it, you know about it, everybody knows about it, but nobody does something about it. I feel like that's a problem. I feel like that's something they could have done better, something which affected the way I feel about the game and the story overall. Now, let's talk about something more exciting, like performance and graphics. Those topics were quite controversial when it comes to Rise of the Ronin. And when it comes to my experience, here's the thing. I've been playing games for a long time, going all the way back to the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. So I've seen my fair share of games, and I can tell you right now, Rise of the Ronin does not look like a PS3 game. If you believe so, you are being dishonest, or you just simply never played a PS3 game, because they don't look the same. If you tell me that it looks like a PS4 game, I would agree. I would definitely agree, but you also have to keep in mind that this was made on purpose. They're trying to tell a story based on Japan and based on a certain time period in Japan. They don't really have the freedom to go crazy when it comes to the architecture. They can't just do whatever buildings and whatever area they want. They have to be realistic. They have to be, again, faithful to the story they're trying to narrate. So in my 138 hours of playtime, it never ever occurred to me that I would stop playing this game because of the way it looked. And I understand that some people, play games for different reasons. Sometimes it's just to kill time. Sometimes it's because you really like a franchise. Let's say, for example, you are a fan of soccer. You're probably going to be playing FIFA despite the game being ass. And you will never be able to tell why exactly someone is playing a game, but you can definitely tell why someone might stop playing a game. It's very important. And I don't think it bothered me. And I don't think it bothered all those people who actually loved the game. But hey, if you have all those high expectations, this is not going to be the place where you find something to satisfy your appetite. It doesn't look that great, but it doesn't look bad either. And you know what? You know what's actually funny? I feel like Rise of the Ronin and Sekiro look pretty much alike, and both games don't look as good as Ghost of Tsushima. Guess what game actually won Game of the Year? It was Sekiro, and nobody said a single thing about the way Sekiro looked, because it all comes down to the story, all comes down to all those other components like the mechanics and the storytelling and the environment and all those other things. So why can't we just forgive Sekiro for looking the way it does, but not Rise of the Ronin? Why are we dragging this game when it has so much more to offer than beautiful graphics? Again, in my experience, those things did not bother me. Same applies to the performance mode. I was playing on performance. I never even tried quality because it's a serious crime if you play those games on those kind of frame rates. That's a crime. There's something I should mention, by the way. I never noticed that I was dropping frames until the last update, and you need to keep in mind that this is a game where a lot of things are happening. You have countersparks, you have your allies, you have enemies, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 coming at you at the same time. I never felt like I was dropping frames. Again, I feel like sometimes people say things. What's more important is how you feel. You could be dropping frames, but it wouldn't feel like you're dropping frames. The moment you start feeling like there's something holding you back from appreciating the gameplay, then you have a problem, okay? And that's fair. But when the number says 55 instead of 60 or 70, who cares if you didn't actually feel? In my experience, like I said, I had no bugs whatsoever, no crashes, nothing. The game ran smoothly most of the time. That's like 95% of the time, and those other 5% are mostly me going crazy after the update. And that's when I noticed that I was maybe even double checking if I was playing on ray tracing, something I never do unless I'm trying to take pictures. And by the way, can we talk about how amazing photo mode is in this game? You don't see people talking about that. You don't talk about how great those pictures look. You know, as a content creator, it's always important when you can just take your time and make something and highlight something in a thumbnail. It makes it so much easier when a game comes with photo mode. And I feel like this is the best photo mode Team Ninja has ever made in a video game. And I love it, and they can only improve upon it. Just look at the pictures, look at how crispy, how colorful they can be. That's amazing. But hey, this is a PS3 game after all, so. And now let's talk about the best thing about Rise of the Ronin, which is the combat and all its mechanics. I just love it. I was a big fan of every single game they made before, from Ninja Gaiden to Nioh to Wolong, and I feel like this is the best combat they've made in a long time. So why exactly is the combat so good? Well, because you have so many tools, you have so many things, you have so much freedom given to you, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming. When you take, for example, the katana, which is potentially the most used weapon in the game, and rightly so, it has 12 stances. Okay, listen, for the sake of this video, if I say stances, I mean combat styles, okay? Stances, combat styles, bear with me. So you have 12 stances for the katana. Those combat styles allow you to perform different moves. So let's say, for example, that you have 3 moves per combat style, per stance. That's 36 moves for the katana alone. And now you need to include the saber, the oxtail blade, the great sword, the pole arms, it's just so many things, and you can even fight barehanded. This is amazing, giving people so many tools, and it doesn't just stop at having so many options. Even the way you perform a block or a counter spike is different from one weapon to the next, from one stance to the next. It does a lot of things to keep in mind. Again, sometimes it may feel overwhelming, you know, having so many options, but I love those options because now again I'm done with the main game. I've done everything there is to do, so now I can just keep using different weapons and trying to experiment with different combinations. And the dojo allows you to train against enemies in order to acquire some gear or just increase your bond level. But this is also the place you want to go if you want to try new weapons, if you want to compete against other people when it comes to your effectiveness in combat, how good, how fast, how technical you can be when you're facing someone. But I do think they should maybe reset the ranks every month or every 2 months, giving people the opportunity to compete in new. And maybe today's leader is not going to be tomorrow's. Just allow us to compete fair and square by resetting the ranks, and let's see who comes on top. And something I really appreciate about this game is the fact that it goes out of its way to explain everything. Anything is explained. So unless you can't read, there's no way you're going to be clueless when it comes to performing some actions or what exactly you need to do or go. Everything is explained. We love that. We appreciate that, and I really hope they keep that one thing in every single game they do in the future. So you have multiple mechanics when it comes to defeating enemies, and I think the most inconsistent one is counter spiking, because like I said, you have different weapons and all those weapons have different animation when you move from one stance to another. I think that's a problem because then it becomes inconsistent to perform some parries, especially if you use the Gike Ryu stance. Whenever you are using some stances, there is a lot of forward momentum, and whenever you are using Gike Ryu in particular, if you don't time your parries well, you're going to move and sometimes find yourself behind the opponent, and because you maybe lost your focus, you're going to get hit by the follow-up attack, not because you were bad at the game, but because you forgot that you switched weapons and now you need to react accordingly. You know, you need to maybe press the parry button faster or slower. It's just a minor inconvenience, but it's something you need to keep in mind whenever you are playing this game. You need to adapt. It's always about adaptability and how well you can perform whenever you switch between stances and weapons. So you know that this game is a very technical game and it's going to take some getting used to, and if you are willing to put in the time, you will get better. You can only improve. The game has over 40 bosses, and even if those bosses only had 5 moves, that's more than 200 animations. I think that's a lot. That's huge. 200 animations for a boss you need to keep in mind, you need to react to. And that's excluding the normal enemies, because some bosses sometimes can have 10 to 15 moves. Some bosses can switch weapons. The potential is huge when it comes to combat, and you'll never ever feel like the combat is stale, like the combat is boring, because it's not. So when it comes to gameplay, I gotta say this is a solid, very solid game, and there is no way you are not going to enjoy it. But that said, something truly bothered me. Actually, 2 things truly bothered me when it comes to the game. The first thing is the difficulty options. Don't get me wrong, I feel like most games may benefit from having multiple difficulty options, because then you allow more people to enjoy the game, and not everybody has the time in the day to sit there for 4 hours to play a game just because they have to get good, just because they can't overcome an encounter, beat a boss. So allowing people to choose from easy to normal to hard to you hate yourself difficulty is fine, except I feel like it's not working for Rise of the Ronin, because whenever you complete the game, the main game, you will unlock the midnight difficulty. This is a more challenging difficulty where everything hits harder, but you also get better gear. If anything, this is when the true game begins. If before the game was called Rise of the Ronin. In the medium difficulty, it should be called Dawn of the Ronin because everything hits hard, but you get great reward. But my problem is, if people are given the option to play on easier difficulty and then they complete the game only to find out that in order to get the best gear in the game they need to get good, I think that's counterintuitive to what exactly you were trying to do before. Because on one hand you are making things easier, but then some might say you are punishing people who actually want to get better gear by forcing them. I'm using this word lightly, by forcing them to get better in order to keep playing the game, to keep getting better gear. I really think the game should have had one difficulty, and then when you're done with it, then you can access the medium difficulty if you want to. But I feel like the disparity is going to be huge because chances are most people are not going to invest the time to actually make it through midnight, because again, it is quite challenging. It will kick your ass. So if you never took the time to learn the mechanics to get better at the game, you might struggle. And I think it goes against what the game is trying to accomplish by trying to make it more accessible. If you make your game more accessible, but at the same time you want to punish people who chose the most accessible option, I feel like that's counterintuitive. It doesn't help anybody. That's one problem I have with the game. I think it should have had one difficulty and one difficulty alone. And then if you want to keep grinding, if you want to keep playing, then you go into the midnight difficulty. And my other issue is a big problem. It's not a minor inconvenience. It has to do with the whole loot system. I really think the way it's designed right now is not appealing. And let me explain. You will get rewards after completing missions, activities, even fighting in the medium difficulty and completing those Bond or Allies missions. You will get plenty of rewards. But the problem is that there is no incentive to switching gear unless you are looking for some specific set bonuses. One of the best things about Nioh was being able to craft as many builds as you wanted. You could switch things around and you could really tell that one piece of gear made a difference, that one bonus set is the reason why you are playing the game differently. But in Rise of the Ronin, I even tried at some point to remove all my gear and experience the game, and I can tell you, you don't feel the difference except when it comes to the damage you're going to receive. You don't feel like you are making a difference. It doesn't feel like my choices to remove my gear made a difference, and that's a problem, because if it doesn't matter, why should I care? Why should I care about the red gear? Why should I care about key damage, max key damage, and harm combat if everything is just incremental? 5%, 10%, okay, but who cares? Again, if it doesn't matter that much, who cares? Chances are you're going to have one build or one set of gear you're going to like, and you're going to stick with it for the entirety of the game. Even if we get Nioh DLC, you will most likely not change your gear, because why would you? Unless you have some new set bonuses, there is no reason to change things around. And that's a huge problem. You have so much loot in this game, but 90% to 99% of that gear is useless. And the reason why I would keep some gear as opposed to enabling the auto sell or auto disassemble feature is because sometimes you may need some stats from that one piece of gear you would have normally disassembled. So I tend to just keep everything unless I know for sure that I'm not going to need those yellows or blues or green gear anymore. And when you also consider that it takes so many resources to level up your gear, to even transfer some stats, you get discouraged really fast and you don't even want to care. So either you want to grind for some meaningless loot you're probably never going to use, or you just get better at fighting. That way you never ever need gear to begin with. And that's sad, and that's quite unfortunate, because I can tell they spent some time crafting the loot system, but it just doesn't work. They need to make some tweaks here and there, because being able to switch things around, to go from one build to another, is going to also affect the way you play the game. Let's say, for example, that I make a build centered around using firearms. I'm going to prioritize using my sub weapon even more, which means that I would invest some stats into performing critical hits, increasing the damage of my critical hits. But let's say, for example, I'm using a build which is centered around tanking attacks, because I want to use a great sword. I want to be able to have super armor whenever I'm performing my martial skills. Then I need to know that the build I'm using is going to be the build which is perfect for that kind of playstyle. But as of right now, I feel like it's the one size fits all. If you have one good build, you can use it for every single playstyle you want. I think they need to allow us to get more creative with the builds and make the builds actually matter. That's how people sometimes play the game. They don't want to just, go through all the loops, just learning every single mechanics. Some people just want a good build to enjoy the game. So again, allow those people to enjoy the game, to be creative. That's a big complaint about the game, even bigger than not having consequences in your main story, in the way you interact with the story and characters. So to sum things up, I think Team Ninja really cooked when they made Rise of the Ronin. Unfortunately, the game is great, but you may not experience it altogether because it's been dragged into the map. That's unfortunate. Let me ask you a question. If you strip a game from everything it has to offer, its mechanics, its story, and all the things which makes it great, and only reduce it to the way it looks, isn't that the same thing as judging someone based on the way they look? Isn't that called racism? Are you a racist? I think not. I don't believe you are. So you should go out there and prove that you're not a racist by playing Rise of the Ronin. Okay, more seriously, I think they cooked. I really think so. But also, I think the problem is that people had a lot of expectations when it comes to the way the game was going to play, the way it was going to look. I don't have any issue with people not liking the art direction, not liking the way the game looks. That's okay. You are entitled to your own opinion. What I have a problem with is people spreading lies, because it becomes harder for the average player, for the average person who might be interested in the game, to know for sure if this is the game for them, because they have so much information, and most of the time misinformation from people who never even bothered to play the game in the first place. Those people most likely went online, saw someone talk about the game, and assumed that that person's opinion was their own, and they kept spreading that opinion, acting like this is truly how they feel about the game, when again they never even played it, or just didn't want to give it a time. And I guess this is where we are. You're going to have to make your own opinion when it comes to Rise of the Ronin. Do you think it's a good game? Do you think it looks bad? Do you think it could have been better? I want to know. So this is my review. Game is great. Go play it.